Welcome. I know you didn't get here by accident. Maybe sleep just wouldn't come, or you're looking for a sound to keep you company. No worries, you're in the right place. Let the sound of rain calm your breathing. Breathe slowly and give your mind a chance to drift away from everything for a bit and dive deeper into the experience. Put on your headphones and turn off the lights. The story is about to begin. In this video, I'll share 4 unforgettable, thrilling camping stories, but not what you'd expect. What starts as a fun adventure in the heart of nature quickly turns into a real nightmare, leaving the characters facing fear, mystery, and sometimes fighting for their lives. Get ready to hear tales that'll make you think twice before packing your bags. Back in April 2020, 17-year-old Sam, who loved camping and hiking in the woods, decided to go on a one-night hiking trip in the Superstition Mountains in Arizona. The word superstition in English means myths or legends, and these mountains got their name because of all the scary stories people tell about them. Many think these stories are just myths, but what really made people genuinely afraid of these mountains were the mysterious deaths that happened there. Because of that, people tended to avoid the mountains, scared of the strange deaths. It became known as the Superstition Mountains, but Sam used to go there regularly for hikes. Specifically, there was an 8-mile loop trail that went through a valley. The night trip he planned was going to be along this 8-mile loop. He'd hike 4 miles, camp there, then hike back 4 miles on the other side of the trail. He was planning to do it with a friend, but his friend canceled last minute due to a family emergency. At first, Sam was hesitant to go alone, but in the end, he decided to do it by himself since he knew the area well. The day he was supposed to go on the trip, he had planned to get there early to make the most of the daylight. But because of some unexpected issues, traffic, and bad road conditions, he didn't get to the start of the trail until 6:45 p.m. That night, Sam knew starting the trip so late was a bad idea since he'd run out of daylight and might not make it to the 4-mile point where he planned to camp. Still, he figured that thanks to his good health and fitness, he could probably get there quickly. About 2 or even 3 miles away, there were some decent camping spots. So, he decided to take a bit of a risk and just try to walk as fast as he could to make the most of the daylight. He parked his car, grabbed his gear, and set off. He needed to reach a good campsite, but he just couldn't move as fast as he thought. Before long, the sun set and it got pitch black. He had a flashlight, but it only lit up about 10 feet in front of him. Still, he kept walking. At one point, he almost slipped off a rock, and he knew if he fell, he'd get hurt. He was about 15 miles away from the nearest help point in an area with terrible cell phone coverage, and the roads leading there were really dangerous. Nobody knew exactly where he was. He found himself in a completely deserted place and soon realized he had made a really bad decision. He knew he needed to stop now and find a decent spot to camp before risking anything else. There was a forest really close by, and he could see an open space about 30 feet off the trail. When he shone his light that way, he saw it was a great spot to set up camp. Actually, right on the edge of that clearing, there were remains of a pit. The fire was really old, but at least it showed that someone had camped here before, which made him feel a bit more at ease and pretty satisfied with the spot where he'd spend the night. He started getting things ready. Sammy hadn't brought a tent on purpose because he preferred sleeping on his pillow with just a sleeping bag over it, then spreading a tarp on top in case it rained. Since this area was surrounded by plenty of pine trees, he managed to stretch the tarp over them. It was perfect. Soon, he lit a fire, opened a can of beans, and started eating his dinner. After a little while eating, he began to feel like something was off. Something felt off. He kept scanning the edges of the trees with his eyes, like he was expecting to see something unusual. But his vision was super limited since he was sitting right next to the fire. If you ever sit by a fire in a dark forest, you know you can only see about 5 feet around the flames. Anything beyond that is just shadows. Plus, the thick pine trees surrounding the clearing made his view even worse. So all he could see was what was really close to him, nothing else. He kept telling himself that was probably why. Maybe he was just on edge because he couldn't see further. But as he tried to convince himself, trying to make sense of that bad feeling inside, he threw a medium-sized rock into the campsite, and it landed right at his feet. Sam jumped up, scared out of his mind. He looked at the rock and immediately linked it to that feeling of fear he had. He started looking around more sharply in every direction, but again, his vision was really limited. For the next 15 minutes, Sam kept scanning the edges of the trees intensely and listened carefully, but he didn't hear a thing. He didn't see any other rocks being thrown, and soon enough, he started convincing himself that there was nothing to worry about. He told himself, "Don't be scared. That feeling's just in your head. The rock probably just fell from a tree. It was nothing to worry about, really." After a while, he convinced himself of that and crawled into his sleeping bag under the tarp to sleep. A few hours later, Sam woke up, still feeling scared, but this time, the fear was even stronger. He didn't hear or see anything, but he definitely felt like something was wrong. At that moment, as he was focusing hard and looking carefully, he heard the dry leaves crunching. It sounded like someone was walking on the leaves about 30 or 40 meters away from the campsite. At first, he couldn't tell if it was a person or an animal getting closer. He started to back away, but about 30 seconds later, the sound began to fade, and he convinced himself that whatever it was had gone and everything was fine. Still, just to be safe, he wanted to grab his flashlight and shine it in that direction. So, he reached to his side, where he had left it when he went to sleep a few hours earlier, but he couldn't find the flashlight. He looked around but never found it. He thought to himself, "That's weird. It was right here next to me, and now it's gone." That's when alarm bells started ringing in his head, because the only way the flashlight could have moved was if he himself had moved it. But he was absolutely sure he hadn't. He swore he had put it by his side before going to sleep, so how did it move? He jumped out of his sleeping bag, slipped out from under the tarp, and started looking around on the ground and the area where he had been lying, searching for the flashlight. While searching, he caught a glimpse of light from the corner of his eye. He turned his head in the same direction he had heard those footsteps and the sound of cracking leaves. Still lying down, he saw his flashlight lying on the ground about 10 meters away. Sam immediately realized something that terrified him to his core. Someone or something had been less than half a meter away from him. He grabbed the flashlight that was beside him. While he was completely asleep and helpless, they moved him there. Right away I thought, "Damn, this is a trap. They're trying to get him away from the campsite." Suddenly, he felt a huge wave of fear, so strong he wanted to freeze, but he knew he had to stay strong to survive this bad situation. He put on his shoes, grabbed his knife, and knew he wasn't going to leave the spot. Instead, he'd build a huge fire, feeding it as much as he could, and never get close to that handheld lamp. Over the next few hours, Sam stood in the middle of the campsite, holding his knife, ready to face whatever was in the forest. During those hours, he kept hearing footsteps. He got close to the campsite, then turned around and backed away every time the fire started to die down. He noticed that the weaker the fire got, the closer that thing came. When he fed the fire, it would back off. But around 3 a.m., he ran out of wood and realized that if he didn't go into the forest to gather more, the fire would go out. And he definitely wasn't going into the forest. That was the whole point. Avoid the forest because that thing was there. As the fire slowly died out, Sam started preparing himself for what was about to happen, because he knew that once the fire disappeared, that thing would feel safe enough to come all the way over and stand right beside him. Just like last time when he grabbed the flashlight, he finally heard footsteps getting closer. Before this moment, the closest that thing had come was about 15 meters away, far enough that he didn't freak out too much, despite how terrifying its presence was. At least there was some distance between them. But this time, with the fire out, he heard the footsteps getting closer until they were only about 3 meters away. Then he hid behind a thicker group of trees, so he couldn't see anything because the darkness was still all around, leaving him completely blind to what was on the other side, those trees. But his senses told him something undeniable. There was some creature standing on the opposite side, silent and still, watching him with a suspicious quietness for 2 whole hours. The poor guy stood right in the middle of the campsite, facing where that thing was behind the trees. Maybe he was going crazy at that moment, imagining what could be hiding back there, just waiting to see what would happen next. But in the end, The only thing that happened was the sun starting to rise. Just before it fully appeared over the horizon, that thing finally moved on the other side, then turned and ran away. After the sun finally came up, Sam didn't rush out right away because he still thought it might be a trap. He waited until the sun was fully shining, then gathered his stuff and almost ran back to the parking lot. He got in his car and drove nonstop for about 20 miles until he reached a gas station. He stopped there to catch his breath. When he got out, he went inside to buy a drink. As he came back out, he noticed someone had written something in the dust on his car's back window. He walked closer to see what it said, and it was simply, "Did you sleep well?" followed by a question mark. Somtak realized that the person watching him at the campsite was the same one who had written that message on his car. Now, he couldn't stop thinking about one question. What would have happened if he had gone back to grab that lamp? Back in 1982, two teenagers, at the start of a love story between a boy and a girl who loved spending time outdoors, set out on a camping trip to a forest in Maine around 1 a.m. On their first night, the girl woke up because she needed to use the bathroom. She was about to unzip the tent when she stopped. She heard some strange noises coming from outside. The sounds weren't loud, but they were definitely there. It was clear that something was digging into the ground. The girl really needed to use the bathroom and thought the sound might just be a small animal or something like that. She started unzipping the tent. There was a faint light from the moon that night, and there was an open space in front of their tent, so the moonlight streamed through and lit up the area quite a bit. She looked through the small opening, but couldn't believe what she saw. There was a grown woman crouched just 2 or 3 meters from their tent, her back turned to them, so she didn't realize the girl was watching from inside the tent. She was digging into the ground like crazy. The girl literally fell. She backed up into her tent, trembling with fear, and fell onto her friend, who immediately got up and asked what was going on. She pointed to the small opening she'd made in the tent's zipper, but couldn't say a word, like her tongue was tied. The boy was confused, but sensed his friend was really serious, so he sat quietly and looked through the little gap in the tent flap. He saw the woman digging. The boy stepped back and looked at his friend, asking, "What's happening over there?" Then he grabbed a flashlight, though his friend begged him not to. "Don't do it," she said, but he unzipped the tent a bit more and shone the light straight at the woman. The beam caught her attention. She stopped digging, stood up very slowly, then turned to face them. Her hair covered half her face, while the other half showed no expression at all. She gave them no clue why she was there. She wasn't acting aggressive, nor was she scared. She was completely neutral. She just stood there, staring at them for a long time without moving, then quietly turned around and left the campsite. After a while, when they were pretty sure she was gone, they packed up their tents and went out, shining their flashlights around the area. But she wasn't anywhere to be found, so they went back to the spot where she'd been digging. There was just this weird hole about 30 centimeters deep in the ground. There was no clear reason or logic for what she was doing. After sitting around wondering what to do, they decided they'd tell the park guards in the morning and maybe they'd handle it. Feeling somewhat confident that the woman wouldn't come back, the two went back inside the tent, zipped it up, got into their sleeping bags, and just as they were about to fall asleep, they heard someone running toward the campsite. They knew right away it was that woman. They unzipped the tent quickly and looked outside. Now, she wasn't digging anymore. She was messing with some of their stuff. Outside the tent, the way she was doing it, they said she looked like a monkey. She was sitting on her knees, picking up something, looking at it, then tossing it behind her. She'd pick up something else and throw that back too, just repeating the same thing, throwing stuff behind her. The boy came out and shone the light on her, saying she had to leave, but she didn't react. She just kept going through their things. Then he got firm and said loudly, "You have to leave now." At that point, she stopped and looked at him like, "So, what are you gonna do if I don't leave?" She stayed there, staring at him silently for about a minute, then got up, turned around, and walked away. Now she's gone. The two friends had no idea what to do since it was clear she was ready to come back even after being confronted. But they stayed outside the tent for about 15 minutes, shining flashlights and making a lot of noise, treating her like an animal and just trying to scare her away from the campsite. After a while, They thought there was no chance she'd come back now, since they'd been aggressive this time, and it seemed like she got the message. They went back inside the tent, and just as they zipped it up, they heard her running straight back to the site, like she'd been patiently waiting for them to go back inside. This time, she ran back to the hole in the ground and started digging like crazy, as hard as she could. They came out of their tent, really angry, yelling at her, "Get out of here, for heaven's sake! What are you doing?" That seemed to scare her a little because she stood up and looked at them like she was saying, "Why are you yelling at me?" Then she ran off, her running almost animal-like, like she was wild. The boy and girl were completely stunned. It was about 2:30 in the morning, and this woman kept coming back to their spot. They didn't know what to do about it, so they lit some lanterns and flashlights and packed up their stuff. They decided to stay awake outside until morning so they could be sure she wouldn't come back or steal anything from them. But around 3:30 a.m., after being outside for 2 hours, they started feeling cold and really tired. There was still no sign of the woman. Finally, the guy asked his girlfriend, "Do you want to go back to sleep? I think she's really gone." So they got back into their sleeping bags and fell asleep. They didn't hear anything else from her. In the morning, when they woke up and unzipped the tent, they looked outside and saw that all their stuff had been scattered around the campsite again. The camping spot and the hole the woman had dug, which was about 30 centimeters deep before, was now over half a meter deep. The two friends realized that this woman must have been hiding in the forest, watching them from 10:30 at night until 3:15 in the morning. All the time they were outside trying to scare her off, she was just waiting, watching them from the darkness. As soon as they got back to their tent, she probably gave herself a little time, then ran back to the spot and flipped everything upside down. But the strange thing was that after they checked all the stuff she had thrown around, nothing was missing. There were just a few things scattered here and there. The really valuable stuff was just lying outside. She could have taken it, but she didn't. After they gathered their things, they went to the park guards and told them what happened. But the guard had no clue how to explain it. He'd never heard of anything like that before. So the two friends left that day, since they weren't ready to spend another night not knowing why that woman was near their camp, digging in the dirt and messing with their things. It was like she was some wild animal, not a person. In the early 2000s, a teenager named Ivan and his dad used to go hunting regularly in the area. When Ivan turned 14, his dad met a super rich landowner in Georgia who offered them a chance to go hunting on one of his best private spots. Just 2 days later, on October 5th, Ivan and his dad decided to take him up on the offer. They woke up really early, drove to the edge of the property, which was actually fenced in, and headed to the main gate. They had the access code the guy gave them, entered it, the gate opened, they went in, closed and locked it behind them, then kept driving down the access road for about 5 miles. They drove for almost a few kilometers until they reached the edge of a big forest. They parked their truck, got out, and put on their gear. In the pre-dawn darkness, they started heading into the woods on foot. Even though they were there primarily to hunt, Ivan and his dad secretly enjoyed wandering through the forest and camping whenever they got the chance, stretching their hunting trips out even if the hunting wasn't great. Since they'd spent a lot of time together in the forest, they immediately noticed something was off as soon as they entered this particular woodland. There were no birds or animals, just complete silence. The only sound they heard was a bird flying overhead, even though they hardly saw anything around. This is really strange, but they thought, this is private land, so there probably aren't many people around. As soon as they arrived, the animals noticed and ran away. Eventually, they reached the hunting spot the owner had told them about, settled in, and got ready to see some animals. But all day long, they didn't see or hear a single animal. In fact, everything was completely silent. Feeling frustrated again, they started packing up to leave the hunting spot and look for a place to set up camp for the night. Ivan's dad suggested, "Well, as you can see, there's obviously nothing here. It's been quiet all day. Why don't we go a little deeper into the forest and set up camp there?" They set up camp there to have a better chance of spotting some animals the next day. They walked for about an hour, moving away from where they had left their truck, until they reached a small, tree-free area that was perfect for camping. After pitching their tent, Ivan's dad said, We still have some daylight left. Want to try our luck and see if there are any animals around? Ivan replied, Sure, why not? They walked a bit away from the camp, marking their hiding spot, and sat down waiting for an animal to show up. But once again, they didn't see any animals. Everything was completely silent. So they turned back toward the camp, and as soon as they spotted their tent, at the camp, when Ivan's dad noticed the tent had collapsed, he said, Oh, it must have been the wind. Ivan replied, It can't be the wind all day. We've been wondering about this complete calm. No weather changes, no wind, nothing. That just makes the silence even more intense, so it can't be the wind. His dad said, Well, when you set up the tent, didn't you secure the poles in the loops? Didn't you set it up properly? Ivan answered, No, I've set up this tent 1,000 times. I know it was secured right. Then they went into the camp and looked at the collapsed tent, utterly baffled, only to discover something strange. The two poles were crossed in an X shape at the top of the tent. Those who passed nylon loops through and fixed them at 4 points at the base have had them removed from their attachment spots. The poles were taken out from all 4 corners. Anyone who knows how tents are set up understands they rely on a tension system. When a rod is fixed at 2 points, it doesn't come off easily. It's firmly secured on both sides. It's actually pretty hard to remove, so the rod would have to break to come out of those attachment points, or someone would have to take it out themselves. But they didn't remove them on their own, and the poles weren't broken, which leaves 2 possibilities. Either they failed to set up the tent properly, even though they clearly remembered how to assemble it. They made sure of it, especially since they had put their equipment inside, or maybe someone came to their camp while they were away and took down the 4 corners. Then they thought it was really strange because we're the only ones who know the lock code. This is private land. No one else should be here. And if someone did come, why would they do that? Why would they randomly tear down our tent and then just disappear? So they figured the mistake had to be on their end. They said maybe they didn't set up the tent properly. Even though they weren't really convinced they'd set it up wrong, they convinced themselves that's what happened, because the alternative was way too weird, and honestly, kind of terrifying. They set up the tent again, lit a small fire, and stayed up for a while chatting before they started feeling tired and decided to go to sleep. They put out the fire, got into the tent, and quickly fell asleep. A few hours later, Ivan suddenly woke up, unsure if he was dreaming or not, but he thought he heard someone laughing a few hundred meters away behind their tent in the forest. Ivan looked over to make sure his dad was still with him in the tent, then started listening closely to what was happening outside. But all he heard was silence, just like it had been since they arrived in the forest. He couldn't hear any laughter anymore, so he told himself, Okay, I must have been dreaming. There was nothing. Laughter echoed outside, and in the end, Ivan went back to sleep. After a short while, he suddenly woke up again because this time his dad was already awake, looking around worriedly. Ivan quickly sat up and asked what was wrong. His dad replied, Do you hear that? Ivan got scared when he heard the broken laughter. His dad was right. It wasn't a dream. Then Ivan realized the laughter wasn't coming from the same direction as before. It was coming from the opposite side and much closer to them. Quietly and cautiously, Ivan told his dad he'd actually heard that laughter 2 hours earlier. The dad turned to him and said, Before we came here, I asked, The owner? I asked, Are there expected to be any other hunters or campers nearby? He replied, This is private, fenced land. There's no one here but you. After this terrifying discovery about both of them, his attention snapped back to the sounds, hoping the noise would stop and whatever it was would leave. But it didn't leave. Then they heard footsteps rushing toward them from deep in the forest. The silence was so thick that the steps sounded incredibly clear. Whatever it was came charging at them fast, then suddenly stopped right at the edge of the camp. At that moment, Ivan grabbed his father tightly while his dad held onto his rifle, ready to open the tent and face whatever was coming. Whether it was something outside or not, the moment Ivan's dad grabbed the tent flap, that thing, or person, whatever it was, started laughing again. The sound was so close to them, it felt like it was right above their heads. The laughter was loud and clear, like daylight, coming straight from outside the tent. Ivan's dad took a deep breath and grabbed the flap. As soon as he started to move it, the laughter suddenly stopped. They didn't hear any footsteps, but they knew something was still out there. The sudden stop in laughter felt like that thing admitting it could make noise now and that it was right there in the tent. Ivan's dad froze, his hand on the tent flap, wondering if he should go out or not. Before he could decide, whatever it was turned around and ran back into the forest, simply disappearing. The two of them sat there in complete silence for several minutes, silently hoping that thing was gone for good. After a while, with no sounds, no laughter or footsteps, Ivan's dad zipped the tent back up and stayed seated, both trying to process what had just happened. Ivan and his dad stayed up all night without sleeping, barely speaking, too scared to even make a sound after that thing heard them moving the tent flap. No matter how quiet it was, the silence was so deep that sounds carried far away. They didn't know who or what was lurking outside. So they stayed silent, gripping their rifles, waiting for sunrise. As soon as dawn broke, they rushed out of the forest, constantly looking back in panic all the way until they reached their truck. Even now, they have no idea who or what was going on in that forest. When they told the landowner about it, he firmly told them it was impossible. The land was fully fenced and cameras monitored the only entrance. They were the only ones who went in and out during that time. And before that, the land had been under surveillance with nothing unusual. In 2016, there was a 25-year-old Wall Street banker named Matt who went on a camping trip near Mount Rainier in Washington state. His job was super stressful, so whenever he got rare chances to rest, he'd disappear into the wilderness for a few days to clear his mind. Even though he lived in one of the biggest cities in the world, Matt was really good at surviving in the wild. On this trip, he decided to completely ditch any known trails and camp in remote, random spots deep in nature. On the first night, he found an open space between the trees and set up camp there. Matt cooked some food over the fire, set up his tent, then went inside. Within minutes, he was fast asleep. After a few hours, Matt woke up to strange sounds coming from outside his tent. It sounded like animals, or maybe just one animal, moving right around his tent. After listening to the noise for a while, Matt turned over and unzipped his tent just a little to take a peek and see if he could figure out what kind of animal it was. But what he saw shocked him completely. There was a man sitting in front of the fire pit. There was no fire burning in the pit. The man was just sitting there, hands on his knees, staring straight at the ground, occasionally kicking the ashes inside the pit with his feet. Matt didn't know what to do, so he kept watching the man through that small opening in his tent. Suddenly, the man lifted his head and looked straight at Matt. Their eyes locked. The man's eyes suddenly widened. He jumped up quickly, then turned and ran away from Matt's camp. Matt couldn't process what just happened. He hurriedly opened his tent all the way, jumped out, and shone his flashlight toward the forest, searching for the man. He wondered to himself, who is this guy? I'm out here in the middle of nowhere, deep in the wilderness of Washington state. How long has he been sitting there, and what does he want? As Matt tried to make sense of this strange situation, he thought, well, he searched in the dark, hoping to catch a glimpse of a flashlight or maybe spot the camp. Maybe the guy had set up his tent nearby. He started looking around in the pitch black, staring between the trees, trying to find any source of light he could see. But there was nothing. No fire, no flashlight, nothing at all. In the end, Matt went back inside his tent, zipped it up, and stayed stunned, unable to understand how someone could be sitting outside his tent for no clear reason, then disappear into the woods without even turning on a little light. After almost a sleepless night, the sun finally rose, and Matt felt a bit relieved. He stepped out of his tent, and some time passed after that. The strange incident started convincing him that it was just a coincidence. Maybe another guy had set up camp nearby. Even though that was rare in this remote area, it was still possible. Maybe the guy was drunk or not in a normal state and just wandered around here. Stranger things have happened, so it was probably nothing serious. Matt felt there was no reason to worry, so he packed up his camp and started walking into the forest. He didn't have a precise route planned. He just had a map and a compass and wandered around the forest somewhat randomly, exploring wherever his steps took him. Over the next 2 days, he covered at least 10 miles. He probably walked about 15 miles, winding and all over the place. One night, he found a nice open spot and set up a new camp. He lit a fire and sat down to eat. While he was sitting there, he heard a rustling sound behind him and was pretty sure it was an animal. He turned around to look but didn't see anything, so he went back to his food. After a little while, he heard the rustling again, but this time he couldn't ignore it. It was clear something was moving back there. He stood up, turned around, and stayed perfectly still, listening. He expected to see a deer or some wild animal coming out of the woods, but instead, he heard a man's voice coming out of the darkness saying, "Do you know the way to—" Bill was standing there when suddenly his heart started pounding really fast. Even though Matt couldn't see him, he knew it had to be the same guy he saw 2 days ago. They were in the middle of a completely quiet place. No hikers, no campers, no one else around. Clearly, this guy had snuck up behind him without him noticing and followed him here. Matt started wondering what this guy wanted. He'd spent the last 2 days wandering random trails for about 15 miles, yet this guy still managed to track him down. Not knowing what else to do, Matt answered with a shaky voice, "I don't know where Bell's Canyon is." Then there was silence. Matt just hoped the guy wouldn't get any closer to the circle of light and would leave. But the other part was trying to hold on to some hope. Maybe there's someone else who lost their way and is actually looking for a place called Fields Canyon. Maybe that person would show up, calm his heart, give him the right direction, and everything would end peacefully. But while Matt was lost in this naive wish, the voice came back out of the shadows. It didn't come closer, but repeated the same question, this time with a sharper tone. "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" At that moment, he didn't answer. He realized this wasn't just some lost hiker looking for directions. Something felt off. And fully aware that he was alone in this creepy place, he knew he had to act fast and find. It was a way to control the situation before it turned into a real danger. Matt took a deep breath, bent down to grab his flashlight. Then, in one quick move, he raised it and pointed it toward the sound. What he saw made him shake. It was the same man he'd seen 2 days ago hiding behind a tree, staring right at him. When Matt shined the light on him, the man shouted, "Turn that light off!" Without thinking, Matt lowered the flashlight, but now he was too scared to raise it again. He was completely sure it was the same guy. He'd been following him for 2 days in the dark forest, standing frozen in place for minutes, too scared to move. But the man stayed put among the trees, not moving. The whole scene was completely silent, like time had stopped. Then the silence broke again with the same voice, but this time it was closer. The man moved, getting nearer, and his voice was so close that Matt could almost hear his breath as he said the same words. "Do you know how to get to Bill's place?" Matt's heart trembled. He quickly lifted his flashlight again, and there the man was, standing just a few steps away. The man's eyes widened like the first time. Then he suddenly turned and ran back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness. Matt started running after him, but then stopped. He ran for about 30 seconds before realizing the terrain here was super rough, and he could easily trip, fall, get hurt, or even get lost in the forest. Then the man had already disappeared, like he vanished into thin air, like he'd somehow managed to get really far away in an instant. So Matt went back to his camp and stood in the middle, lost in thought, wondering what to do next. There was no phone signal here, and he was 3 days' walk from his car, right in the middle of nowhere. No one knew where he was because he hadn't set a clear route or told anyone his destination. He grabbed his knife and stood in the middle of the camp, ready for the next few hours, constantly looking around, expecting something. At any moment, the man might reappear from the trees, or his voice might echo from the darkness again. Those hours felt like hell, full of anxiety, waiting, and fear. Finally, close to 3 a.m., Matt couldn't keep resisting anymore. Exhaustion had completely worn him down. The man didn't show up again, and there was no sound from him. Matt thought maybe he'd actually moved away, so he decided to catch some sleep since he knew he had to start the tough, epic journey back to his car in the morning, a trip that would take at least 3 days. Matt went into his tent and spent a few more restless, tossing hours until the sunlight began to creep into the sky. He jumped out of his tent. He quickly gathered his stuff and started almost running toward his car. All day long, as he climbed and moved forward, Matt kept looking back constantly, expecting to see that man at any moment. He'd been following him for days, covering over 15 miles through rough terrain, so the idea that he was still being chased felt very real. He constantly felt like someone was watching him, his breathing was heavy, and fear was taking over. As the sun began to set, Matt realized he had no choice but to camp out again. He found a small clearing among the trees and set up camp, but he was completely worn out, both physically and mentally, after spending the whole day almost running under intense pressure. Fear and anxiety took over, so he went into his tent and quickly fell asleep. But after a few hours, he woke up to the sound of footsteps walking around his tent. He immediately knew it had to be that man. Matt was still deep in the wilderness, far from the parking lot, and no one else but that stranger could be here. He kept watching. Matt stayed inside his tent, gripping his knife tightly. For hours and hours throughout the night, the man kept walking around the tent, his steps circling in the dark, silent, not getting closer, just pacing. Then, around 4 or 5 in the morning, Matt heard the man's footsteps as he ran away into the forest, pushed by the dawn's light to flee. At sunrise, he jumped out of his tent, quickly packed his stuff, and literally started running toward his car, hoping to get there before having to spend another night in the forest. All day, he kept moving forward, constantly looking back, fully aware that the man was still chasing him. There was no doubt. Somewhere among the trees, he was watching him, but Matt never saw him, never caught a glimpse. As dusk approached, he realized he wouldn't make it to his car. He was still too far away. When darkness fell and he couldn't keep going, he had no choice but to find a clearing among the trees and set up his tent again. He went inside, zipped it shut behind him, grabbed his knife, and sat down, waiting, just waiting. He heard that familiar sound, but after a few hours, Matt didn't hear anything at all. He started wondering, maybe the guy finally left him, maybe he's not following him anymore, maybe it's all over. Exhausted, Matt lay on his back trying to sleep. Then suddenly, from deep in the forest, he heard that familiar voice again. "Do you know the way to Bell Canyon?" Matt sat up straight, his heart pounding like crazy. He was so scared he thought he might have a heart attack. He didn't know what to do or say. He just sat there, gripping his knife tightly. Then the man started running fast near his tent, making animal sounds and yelling. Now and then, Jan Witawe kicked the fallen leaves, then ran around the tent again and again in circles, over and over. This went on until dawn. Then he fled back into the depths of the forest. He didn't waste a single moment. He jumped out of his tent, packed his stuff quickly, and ran all the way to his car. Once inside, he shut the door, locked it, and burst into tears of joy. He felt such a huge relief he could hardly believe it himself. Then he sped off from the parking lot and headed to a nearby hotel, where he finally got a phone signal. He thought about calling the police about that man, but then hesitated. He thought to himself, what am I going to tell them? The guy didn't commit a crime, he was just scary. So, he decided to call the police. In the end, he went back to New York and had to accept the fact that some strange guy in the wilderness of Washington state was able to track him for 3 days, covering about 30 miles over rough terrain without using a flashlight or any gear. All he kept saying the whole time was, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" If you like this story, don't forget to support us by liking and sharing the video with anyone who enjoys this kind of content. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for a variety of cool stuff you won't want to miss.